And what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to understand what the field is moving towards in terms of its understanding about professional development. And something that I had been just calling a list of criteria, you've been calling design characteristics or design features. And I think that, you know, the my understanding of the literature is that we've really glommed onto these design features, and we've really seen those as the qualities of programs that would somehow instill effectiveness inside of professional development. And what your paper really has done is it's reconceptualized how we should think about the qualities of professional development that might lead to more effectiveness. So one thing that you do, which I'd like you to talk about, is just to talk. You're very pragmatic, and you talk about the teaching problems that professional development is designed to address. So maybe you could just illuminate sort of how you frame the different types of problems that in teaching that professional development is trying to address.
The first one most people think about, is representing subject matter concepts to your students. And the reason I prefer that to saying you need to know content knowledge. I mean, normally we would say you need to know content knowledge. But if instead we say you need to be able to represent these concepts to your kids, then that's a whole different problem than simply knowing the content knowledge. And then you could start arguing with yourself about what's the best way to represent division by fractions, or what's the best way to represent the second law of thermodynamics, or whatever it is you're trying to teach. Make it relevant to how you're going to explain that to 15-year-olds or 5-year-olds old or 8 years old or whatever. So that's the first problem, and every teacher faces it every day as the content changes from day to day.
So one interesting thing about that is that it kind of combines content knowledge and pedagogical content knowledge, but it shifts it towards the purpose of conveying it to students as opposed to an action that a teacher would take.
Right. And I think our mistake has been to define those as discrete topics. You know, you should have pedagogical content knowledge, whatever that is. You should have content knowledge, whatever that is. And you should have knowledge of student motivation or something like that. And right. This changes it into, this is the problem that you need to solve. So let's talk about how to do that.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So that's the first problem, is representing your content. But the second is engaging your students, because they don't have to learn. They have to be in school, but they don't have to learn. And that's another problem that we've never explicitly confronted, is that there's an audience of resistant students there, some of them at least. And so rather than giving a course on child psychology or on behavior management, we should be talking about how do you solve this problem of engaging students with the content that you've got to teach them. So, and then the third one is management of your students, and I define that as containing them, because I think that's really what teachers are trying to do. They can't have kids leaping out the window. They can't have them running around the class and distracting each other. And what I've noticed watching teachers is the bigger problem is the students distract the teacher and get her off task. And so that's the third problem. And, right, exposing student thinking. That's the one that sort of dovetails with making content comprehensible to them and engaging them. And then the third part of that is exposing their thinking, because otherwise you never know for sure what exactly they're getting from your lesson.
Okay. And just talk a little bit about what it means to expose student thinking.
Well, some of the programs I studied spent a lot of time on that. They spend time on how you pose questions to students, how you get them to solve problems and discuss them with each other. A lot of the pedagogy that people like to embrace these days, that they call ambitious pedagogy, is really a pedagogy that's designed to get kids talking out loud and thinking out loud about whatever they're learning.
Mm.
And so that to me is an important feature. And you may recall you and I were on a panel that the Spencer Foundation held about using data. And I was very annoying on that panel because I kept kicking and screaming and saying teachers don't need data. They need to see this inside the classroom, because that's when they can confront it and address it, not 3 weeks later when they get the test data. So, and I persist in thinking that that's what we have to do, is help them find that, see that right now while they're teaching it, not, 3 weeks later on the test score.
Okay, and you have 4 ways that you see how programs go about enacting with teachers?
About trying to get their message translated, yeah.
Right. Okay, and so what are those?
So, the ones that were, well, I'll sort them into the ones that work and don't work. I mean, the one thing we do a lot of is just tell them, do it like this. So I call that a prescription. That's a fairly common category. And even though most of us give lip service to prescriptions as not being the right way to go, it still is amazing how many PD programs are organized to give them a prescription. Mm-hmm. A lot of them today are organized around an observation form, and the observation form is the prescription. So if you can do everything that it says to do, then you're doing what they want you to do. So that's a prescriptive approach. So a lot of them taught strategies, and the big advantage of those is that they are goal-oriented, so they fit nicely into my notion that you should sort your program, you should couch your message in the context of problems that they face. So you would say, if you're having difficulty motivating your students, here's something you could do. Here's a question you could ask. Here's something you could do to provoke their thought. And so you're teaching them something that might be just as specific as a prescription, but you're defining it in terms of its purpose, not just as do this. So so I call those strategies. They're often very procedurally clear, but they're defined in terms of why you do it, what you're going to get from doing it.
Right. And then you talk about insight.
Insight is a difficult one, and one that I had a hard time. I'm still not quite satisfied with the label, but there were programs that spent a lot of time helping teachers, just like observing classrooms, watching kids. One early one you probably remember in math, I'm naturally blocking on their name now, they actually showed videos where the researchers were interviewing students. And so the insight for teachers was just to see how students reasoned. The program never said you should do this about it or that about it. They just showed them how kids thought. And so that was the insight, was what would guide them in the future, that they would now understand their kids differently and see them differently and interpret their behavior differently than they had.
Right. And then the fourth one sounds like a more larger programs, the idea that they would be conveying a whole body of knowledge?
They're not necessarily larger. Some of them, well, you could tell by the diagrams which ones are big in the study, and some of them were big, but not all of them. And there was one very small one, but it was organized literally like a college course. I think they may have gotten college credit for it, so they met 3 hours a week, for a semester, or something like that. So, and some of them are more large, big in the sense of large scale, but they might be organized so that teachers go to a seminar every 6 weeks throughout the school year, or they might even have a 2-week seminar in the summer, something like that. Okay. But they're different mainly in the fact that the main point of the PD is to just convey a body of knowledge to them. So
I kind of I glossed a little bit over something, so I want to step back a little bit and just ask you to characterize what you think are the main findings of the study that you did.
What are the features of these programs that are successful? And one is that they are presented to teachers as relevant to one of their goals. So they're not just presented as a body of knowledge; they're presented. But another one is um, the place where I'm having trouble right now, and I think the field as a whole is blending together ideas about teacher agency and autonomy with ideas about outside knowledge and how you get outside knowledge into the teaching system. And if you just bring it in and set it down on the table there, it doesn't do much good. But on the other hand, if you have teacher study groups that are autonomous, they're not learning as much as they could either. And in some of the studies that I found, they were using professional learning communities as a comparison group. So they're comparing their program with a PLC. And it was clear that they were more effective. So there's on one hand, you've got to have some outside content knowledge come in, something that helps them in a way that stuff that they didn't know before that's helpful to them. But on the other hand, you have to have a format that gives them a lot of time to work through that and digest it and think about it and translate it into the context of their own setting. If you walk in and say, here's a better way to teach math, it's not going to work in Mrs. Smith's classroom because she's got that LD kid over in the corner, that's always acting out. And it's not going to work in Mrs. Jones's class because she's got those two boys that are constantly talking to each other. Or, everybody has something. Or it won't work in this other classroom because hers is right before lunch and she's always having to stop the lesson before it's finished because the lunch bell rings. So every teacher has something that makes every lesson somehow unique. So when you have a concept, whether it's cooperative learning or student engagement in math or active learning or ambitious instruction or whatever it is, you have to help them understand it well enough that they can incorporate it into the situation that they're in. You can't just give them a standardized method.
Right.
So there's a funny balance between, on one hand, giving them something that they don't already know, something that comes from outside into the system. And on the other hand, you still have to let the system function enough. They have to find a way to incorporate that. You can't just bring them in and drop it off. I can sense from your questions, you're really more interested in this from a policy perspective than from a teacher-educator perspective. And one of the things I think is a problem right now is that there's too much PD. Every teacher winds up getting a new PD almost every year. Sometimes they're in 2 or 3 PDs at a time. And that winds up hindering learning because they can't make sense of all those things at once. And one of the findings in that paper is that it takes a long time. And when a PD program stays with them for a year, but then the researcher follows them for another year, I think in every single case, student achievement went up the second year when there was no PD going on.
Wow.
Which tells me that they need time to incorporate those ideas and that they continue to work on them on their own over time. And I think when we get too many PDs, as we now have, they cut each other off. So teachers will focus on this one while the PD is there, but then they got to run over and learn something else from the next guy. So I think we're at a saturation point where we're actually diminishing our own returns.
It's really provocative, this notion that maybe slowing things down and extending it over time to give teachers more time to grapple with what that means like in practice. Mary, it was so much fun to read this paper, to learn about it, to think a little bit about how it relates to this knotty problem of professional development. And it really gave me a lot of insights. And so I really appreciate both what you wrote and for sharing time with me today. Thank you.